Hello, welcome to Walk in the Park. My name is Tony Ingram, and this is recorded on December 13th, 2017. If you want to see all of my Walk in the Park episodes, go to my video blog at walkinthepark.tv. That's the URL, walkinthepark.tv. Walk in the Park is a weekly public access television series in Ithaca, New York. You can see all of our schedule at pegasus.webstarts.com. Channel 13 is where all the public programs are on. That is people like myself who are trained producers from the general public in the area of Ithaca. We take a class and then we can start producing our own shows. But also Pegasus stands for Public Educational Government Access System. So there's 3 channels. And there's a public channel for public producers, an educational channel for educational institutions, and the coverage of government meetings and so forth. We also have a Facebook page. You can go there at Pegasus TV. Go there and like and become a fan and see what's new there. And sometimes there are shows posted there online. And also if you go to the pegasuswebstarts.com page, you can see some of the latest shows that are online. This time we're going to take a look at particularly parks around Owasco Lake. Now where's Owasco Lake? Well, here is a map of most of the Finger Lakes in the Seneca-Oswego River watershed. You can see that the area that's in yellow in the middle here is the watershed of that river that contains all the Finger Lakes from Owasco Lake in the east all the way through Canandaigua Lake on the west. And just below the word Canandaigua, you can see some other lakes. There's 4 smaller Finger Lakes that drain into the Genesee River and go through Rochester. But the rest of them go through Oswego, New York, past Syracuse and so forth. So in the middle of the 2 longest lakes, Seneca Lake and then Cayuga Lake, you can see Ithaca indicated down on the bottom there. And just to our east, our nearest neighbor is Owasco Lake, which is considerably smaller, as you can tell, than Cayuga Lake. So let's take a look at this Google picture here, Google map here showing Owasco Lake and the Owasco Lake Valley. And see what else we got on that slide. Okay, then below that we've got, okay, here is a Department of Environmental Conservation simple map of Owasco Lake. I'm going to go back to this one here, just looking at you. See that Owasco Lake is there's Cayuga Lake up on the upper left and then the Skaneateles Lake on the extreme right. But Owasco Lake is in a groove, in a valley, as all the Finger Lakes are. And there's a valley that extends south through the hills from Owasco Lake. So let's take a look from this simple map here showing Owasco Lake and has some of the vital statistics. It is 712 feet above sea level. Now that's a bit more than Cayuga Lake. Cayuga Lake is 380 feet, about 381 feet above sea level. So it's considerably higher up in the elevation than we are. 6,665 acres. That doesn't really tell us a whole lot, but shoreline length is 27 miles. It's just over 11 miles long. The maximum width is 1.3 miles. And like Cayuga Lake is like 3.5 miles wide at its maximum width. And the, maximum depth is 177 feet. Cayuga Lake is 435 feet or so at its maximum depth. And its mean depth is 97 feet. So those are some of the things about Owasco Lake. It's a beautiful lake like all the Finger Lakes are. Here is a picture of its watershed. That is all the land that water drains from that goes into Owasco Lake, all the creeks, all the springs, and so forth. Now, before I was showing you the picture of, this is the watershed of all of the Finger Lakes except for the 4 western ones, so 7 of the 11 Finger Lakes, into the Seneca River, it's called, Seneca-Oswego River. But each lake itself has a watershed. So we're going to take a look at some of those. We're going to take a look at some of the features of the watershed here. Let's go back to this picture. And if you look, well, let's see. I don't know if you can really see it, but in the lower left of this picture, there's a dot. There's a red dot there. That indicates a stream that comes into the watershed of Owasco Lake. That's the Owasco Inlet. and that flows through that valley north towards the lake, okay? So, and flowing into the Owasco Inlet is Dry Creek, which is in Fillmore Glen State Park. Here we zoomed in, so where that dot was before, this is Fillmore Glen State Park, which is another of our gorges that many of us in Ithaca don't know about, especially if you're new to the area. You may not have been to Fillmore Glen, but it's as big a park as any of the ones we have around here. And I think it's over 1,000 acres, and it's a beautiful gorge and a campground and so forth. It is named after this guy, Millard Fillmore, who was, Millard Fillmore? Was the 13th president of the United States from 1850 to 1853, the last to be a member of the Whig Party while in the White House. A former U.S. representative from New York, Fillmore was elected to the nation's 12th vice president in 1848 and was elevated to the presidency by the death of Zachary Taylor. He was instrumental in getting the Compromise of 1850 passed, a bargain that led to a brief truce in the battle over slavery. He failed to win the Whig nomination for president in 1852, and he gained the endorsement of the nativist Know Nothing Party 4 years later and finished third in that election. So, obscure today, Fillmore has been praised by some for, I'm getting ahead of myself here, praised by some for his foreign policy, but he is criticized by others for his enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act and his association with the Know Nothings. Historians and scholars have consistently ranked Fillmore as one of the worst presidents. Well, Fillmore was born, let's see, do we have a little more information on him? Yeah, Fillmore was born in I think it was 1800. It's like January 1800. It was the first president born in the 1800s. And it was in a cabin something like this. This is a replica of the cabin that he was born in. So he was born into poverty. His parents were tenant farmers. And there's actually a memorial site, a birthplace site up on the hill about 5 miles east of there, up on the hills. Don't have a picture of that. But this cabin is something like, probably of the era, and something like the cabin that he was born and grew up in. And then he was self-educated, became a lawyer, went to Buffalo, and one thing led to another, and he became president. But one of the less memorable presidents that we've had. So Fillmore Glen is named after Millard Fillmore because he was a famous figure in the area. So let's take a look at Fillmore Glen. This is a gorge that, as we're talking about, this is looking up towards the beginning of the glen. And you walk in, there's a short little path that goes into a waterfall. And the waterfall area is called the Cowsheds. And let's go and take a picture of that, take a look at that. So this is a beautiful waterfall, pours over a layer of limestone, and I actually have a video where I will tell you more about this waterfall and this section of gorge. So stand by here, we'll get that one up running. The Cowsheds. This is an area known as the Cowsheds in Fillmore Glen State Park. And it's the big waterfall at the end of Fillmore Glen, which goes, almost a couple miles from up on Summer Hill to the east of Moravia, pouring into the Owasco Inlet Valley, just south a few miles of Owasco Lake, right on the edge of the village of Moravia on the southern edge. But the waterfall here, after this long trip down through the gorge, which is a very lush, verdant place, pours over this limestone ledge, and up on this side here is a overhang of limestone. I believe this is the Tully limestone, which is the same formation of rock which forms the bottom of Taganic Gorge. It's also the same formation of rock over which the Ludlowville Falls in Lansing pours. And I was just over on Skaneateles Lake at the Carpenter's Falls Bahar Preserve of the Finger Lakes Land Trust and a New York Department of Environmental Conservation unique natural area called Carpenter's Falls, and it looks like that pours over this same widespread formation layer of limestone rock, which was once a probably deposited by algae in an ancient sea nearly 400 million years ago. So it's a long story there, but it's a beautiful spot, and I love coming back here in Fillmore Glen State Park to hang out with the cowsheds. Now, why do they call it the cowsheds? Well, I've heard two stories. One is that in the summertime, back in the old days, the farmers' cows used to come up in here and get out of the heat, and they'd hang up in here under the cow shed here. They just hang up in here, so they call it the cowsheds. And then another story, which I doubt, is that this is a place where cattle rustlers hid their cattle up in here. I don't know if there's any truth to that. I kind of doubt it. I think the cattle knew what they were doing to get out of the heat when they were just grazing down in the valley here. So the cowsheds, Fillmore Glen State Park, come visit it. This is a beautiful place and not as well known as some of the gorges around Ithaca. Of course, this time of year the gorge is closed, like most of the other gorges of the Finger Lakes State Parks. Teganic Gorge is usually open in the winter unless they've had some unusual amount of ice or rockfall, that sort of thing. So anyway, Fillmore Glen State Park. So let's go back up in the air. And Fillmore Glen is in the lower left of this picture, on the side of the steep side of the valley that Owasco Lake is in. And the glaciers had dug that out and left a steep valley side, so formed waterfalls and gorges. So if you go up the valley, you go through the village of Moravia, going up towards the center, towards the lake, and then you get into a wetland, big wetland area called the Owasco Flats. And there's a preserve there that's been created. It's a multiple cooperative project to preserve the great wetlands at the south end of the lake. And then you have the lake proper. It goes all the way up 11 miles up to the city of Auburn in the northern end. And there's a park up there called Emerson Park, which is very developed. It's not a wild area. So we're going to take a look at a little flyover, a Google Earth flyover of Owasco Lake, starting at Fillmore Glen. Okay, so a virtual flyover of the length of the 11-mile length of Owasco Lake. But let's go back to the south end of the lake here in this picture by Bill Hecht, who is a local photographer, does a lot of aerial photography. And here I'll quote something that was written about this. This is looking at the Owasco Flats, they're called. At the southern end of Owasco Lake lie an inlet and diverse floodplain that provide excellent birding, paddling, and a couple of short nature trails, commonly known as Owasco Flats. The inlet serves as an important habitat for fish spawning within its emergent marshes, which also does double duty as a natural water quality buffer for Owasco Lake. Nearly 70% of Cayuga County's water supply comes from Owasco Lake, and over half of the lake's water filters through the inlet. So the wetlands' importance for the community cannot be overstated. And so here's a picture of the Owasco Flats Park. Publicly accessible parts of the flats comprise Owasco Flats Park, managed by Cayuga County, parcels owned by the City of Auburn, and the Owasco Flats Nature Preserve, a nonprofit grassroots organization dedicated to nature conservancy and land stewardship. Currently, the area is under consideration to become part of a larger DEC, Department of Environmental Conservation, wildlife management area. The future plan would be to unify and expand the boundaries to include 1,500 acres. So this is universally being recognized as an important area. So we're going to take a look at another video here. This one is going to be about scenes around Owasco Lake, starting at, let's see, I guess we're going to start at Owasco Flats. So stand by and we'll have that coming right up here. So we started out in that video in the Owasco Flats Park Nature Preserve down the southern end of the lake, north of the village of Moravia, and we ended up in very developed Emerson Park in Auburn. So those are really the only two public access parks, preserved lands, conservation areas, whatever you want to call them, on Owasco Lake. So the Finger Lakes Land Trust has made it a high priority to create another preserve and preserve some shoreline that would be accessible to the public on the east shore. So let's go take a look at that one. But before that, I just want to remind you, this is walkinthepark.tv. Walk in the Park. See all my shows at walkinthepark.tv. But let's go take a look at that particular. That's Emerson Park there. Let's go take a look at this project by the Finger Lakes Land Trust. Okay, so yeah, that's going to be great. We can gather the resources as a community and as a region to open up yet another area on Owasco Lake that has such little access. So that's all I've got to today, and that's all the time we have. So see you again soon. Turn off this screen and go outside for a walk in the park.